Oh, yeah. They gotta go. You gotta turn it on.
That could help.
Does not work in the OSS mode.
All right. There we go. There we go. Let's try this again. Good morning.
Good morning.
It's a joy to be here. Pastor Dave said last night that this was his 45th advance, I think. So this is my 4th advance. But even having only had 4, I would agree with him that there's never been a bad advance that I've been to. So it is a joy to have all you guys here on a kind of a crazy weekend, a crazy time in America. Last night, Dave began this weekend by thinking about and talking about the authority that Jesus has over everything. He laid a foundation and shared that God the Father gave his son Jesus authority over all of creation. And I think that he did such a wonderful job describing that, but I'm also convicted right now that if we leave that truth as an abstract concept, we will miss what God has for us this weekend. We will waste our time if we don't apply this truth of Jesus' authority over all creation. So Jesus' authority has huge implications for how we should live. So today we're going to get practical. And we're going to explore the implications of Jesus' authority in our work lives. You know, many of us spend between 40 and 60 hours a week working in some capacity. So our work is a large percentage of our waking hours, but there's a lot of us that struggle to connect Jesus with our work. In his book, Every Good Endeavor, Pastor Tim Keller points out that most of our thinking about religion and work tends to be somewhat superficial. He says that, we might think about Jesus and work and suggest that, okay, well, that means that we shouldn't do bad things at work. Maybe we shouldn't swear at work, or maybe we shouldn't lie on our time card, or maybe we shouldn't have an affair with someone at work. And if we're really kind of serious Christians, we might even feel an obligation to do what Nick just said just a moment ago and share God's truth with somebody who's at our workplace who may not be a Christian. Well, these are all very important applications of Jesus' authority over our work lives. And Christians should be ethical. Christians should evangelize in their workplace. But at the same time, I think there are many more implications of Jesus' authority over our work. And so I want to dive a little bit deeper this morning and think more deeply about what Jesus means to our work lives. And before we dive in, I want to specifically speak to those of you here today who are not in a place where you have a traditional job right now. You may be retired, you may be a stay-at-home dad, you may be laid off or unemployed for some other reason. Now, before we get started, I do not want you to tune me out. I was sitting at my table at dinner last night, and a couple of the guys were like, well, this doesn't apply to us. We're not in our jobs anymore, because they were retired. But I want us to all listen up, because working is about more than just having a job. It's about what call God has on your life right now. And that message applies to every single person here today. So let's think about this together. And as we begin today, I want to offer you 2 foundational truths. If you're taking notes, 2 foundational truths about God and work. And the first is this. Work is God's good idea. Work is God's good idea. For many of us, work is a burden. Mondays are misery, and we can't wait for Friday to arrive. Work is a weight. It's this necessary evil that we have to endure just so we can get the reward from it. But this is not how God intended work to be. God intended work to be something fruitful and something that gives us joy. You see, when God created the first man, he gave him something to do. And we read about this in Genesis 2:15. If you have your Bibles with you this morning, please turn over to Genesis. We're going to spend most of our time there. In Genesis 2:15 we read, "The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and keep it." So Adam was a gardener. How many of you like to garden? Okay. So how many of you know Bob Rudd? Bob, raise your hand over there. Okay. So Bob has an amazing garden. You ask him to show it to you sometime. I don't actually garden as much as I used to at this point in my life. But gardening is good. Gardening is beautiful. When we think about our ideal life, think about for a moment, if you didn't have to do all the things you're doing right now, how would you like to spend your life ideally? For some of you, I know that it would be a kind of a never-ending fishing vacation. I saw Kyle took a couple pictures of some pike he caught last night, or this morning even, right?
Just yesterday.
Just yesterday. Okay, all right. Kyle took some pictures of pike. For some of you, it might be living in a cabin in the woods in some remote wilderness somewhere. For others of you, it might be a beach vacation.
Oh, yeah.
I know Woj likes to go to the beach. He sent me pictures. Some of them I don't want to see anymore. that guy needs to keep his shirt on. So, too far, maybe? All right, it's true though. So we may imagine all sorts of things that we could do that would be enjoyable with our lives, that would be fun. But when we think about how God made us, He did not make us to thrive in this constant state of leisure. He made us to thrive doing good, fulfilling work. God made Adam to work, and He put him in the garden so he could work. We weren't made to sit still. So what was God's purpose when He gave us work? What was He trying to do? What was His thought process? Well, over the next couple of minutes, I want to share some reasons why God made us to work. And to make my case, I want to take us back to the book of Genesis. And if you haven't already turned there, go ahead and turn to the book of Genesis now. We're going to begin in Genesis 1:27. For those of you who are new to the Bible, Genesis is the first book of the Bible, so it's really easy to find. And as I read through Genesis 1:27 in the next couple verses, I want you to be on the lookout for words that indicate authority. Words that indicate authority. Genesis 1:27 and following. So God created man in His own image. In the image of God He created him. Male and female He created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." And God said, "Behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food." Well, those of you who've been joining us for our Sunday services at CF over the past couple weeks will know that we've spent some time talking about what it means to be made in God's image, and particularly what it means for us that all people are created in God's image, and how we should treat those who are maybe more vulnerable in the world. We talked about immigrants last week, for instance. Well, this idea of being made in God's image has so many implications that go beyond just our care for those who are vulnerable. And it has a huge effect on the way we think about our work lives and what God has for us in our work. And in the passage I just read, we see that being made in God's image has implications for how we should think about work. The Creator, the one who has authority over all the universe, has imprinted Himself on us. And He has appointed us to exercise that authority over the rest of creation. We are to rule this world with an authority that flows from Him. He has given us dominion in His domain. we can't create out of nothing like God did when he spoke the world into existence. But in a real way, we are secondary creators who are molding what he has already made. God invites us to mold his materials. In our work, we subdue the world. In our work, we subdue the world. I sometimes wonder how our attitude about work would change if we remembered that we were subduing the world. Before I came to college in Chicago, I was a custodian at an elementary school in northern Michigan. But in that job, I was not just vacuuming floors and cleaning toilets. No, I was creating order out of disorder. I was subduing creation. Maybe we should start talking like this a little bit more. Next time somebody comes to you and asks you what you do for a living, I want you to turn around and tell them, I subdue creation. Because that's what we are doing. No matter what industry that you are in, if you are in childcare or restaurant work or construction or healthcare or the arts, we are all subduing creation because that is what God made us to do. In our industrialized world today, people are kind of viewed as disposable. They're valued for what they produce, not who they are. But a biblical understanding of work corrects this mistake of modernity. You and I are more than animals with creative capacity. We are human beings made in God's image. We are not just cogs in a machine somewhere of productivity. You are an image bearer exercising authority over this world that God has created. And that makes your work significant. But it's essential, while we're thinking about this, that we remember the source of the authority that we have over creation. We do not have an autonomous authority over creation, an authority that flows directly from us. No, we have a delegated authority over creation that comes from God. This is his world. This is not our world. And when we exercise our authority over creation, we must be responsible. Because we should respect this world that God has made. And this has a lot of implications. It's his world, so we shouldn't trash it. This has implications for how we hunt, for instance, and what we use in the products of what we hunt. It has implications in the way we treat the environment in the world. We shouldn't carelessly pollute this world that God has made. If we are exercising God's authority over creation, another implication of this truth is that all of our work is worthwhile. All work is valuable before God. Whether you're white collar or whether you're blue collar, your work is valuable before your Creator. We can't look down on anyone who has a lesser job than we have. We're not allowed to do that if we are understanding God's word correctly here in the book of Genesis. Both Dave and I have served as pastors in our lives. But our work is no more significant to God than your work is. God sees all those who are working in his honor for him as being equal in their value in the work that they do. And I so love the truth that the reformers, Calvin and Luther and others, shared about the holiness, the sacredness of our work. Martin Luther puts it this way. He suggests that God is active even in a simple job like milking a cow. That God is actively milking the cow through that milkmaid. And through that, God is providing for his people and serving his people. If you work in a job that other people look down on, know for a fact that God does not look down on the work that you do. Amen. It has value to him and it has value to the rest of his world. So we are blessed to rule over this world that God created. But God gave us this responsibility so that we could bless other people around us. So that we could bless other people that we live with. And as we serve in the role that God has given us, we will be a blessing. When we serve, our customers will be blessed by our labor. When we serve, our families will be blessed by the resources that we provide. When we provide a service, we are passing on the blessings that God has given us to those that we are serving. God gave us authority over creation so we might use that authority intentionally to bless others and not just ourselves. You know, when Jesus was on earth, he was asked a question by some religious leaders. They asked him what the most important commandment was. When he answered that question, he did not give one answer, he gave two answers. And what did he say? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And number two, love your neighbor as yourself. Absolutely. And when we work effectively, we are doing both of those commands that Jesus says are the most important commands. We are loving God by living out the fact that we were made in his image, and we're serving our neighbors as we're providing for them. Work is God's good idea. And when we work well, we reflect his creative character. So in Scripture, we're given this beautiful vision for God's plan for work. We've seen that already in the book of Genesis. But sadly, most of us don't experience this beautiful vision that I just described. You know, as I was just talking here, you may have thought to yourself, if God made work such a great thing, why is my job so miserable? You may have thought to yourself, Enoch, you wouldn't be saying that work is so wonderful if you knew what I had to deal with at my job. Well, inside, all of us know in some way that our relationship with work is broken. Things are not the way that they should be. Well, I want you to think for a moment with me about what your hardest job that you've ever had was. What is the hardest job that you've ever had in your life? Think about that. Well, one job comes to mind immediately for me, and that's the job I had when I was in seminary. On weekends when I was in seminary, I sold corn at farmers markets in Rockford, Illinois, and also in Beloit, Wisconsin, not too far from here. So during my shift, I would work about 24 hours during a 30-hour period of time. I had about 6 hours that I was sleeping on the floor of a coworker's living room. And when I started my shift, I had to get up at 4 a.m. on Friday morning and drive an hour and a half to the farm so I could pick up the corn. Once I got to the farm, I would pick up the truck, I would drive the truck to the individual markets, I would unload the corn, I would sell the corn, and then reload what was left, move back up. I had a tent I had to set up and everything. And then the first day it was like a 15-hour day. And then the second day was like a 9-hour day. And, I lost some weight that summer, but that was an exhausting job. That was an exhausting weekend after working a full week doing other things as well. You know, your most difficult job may have been something like custodial work or construction or food service. Maybe your worst job could have been featured on Dirty Jobs with Mike Rowe. I know a lot of you have done nasty, messy work. You know, perhaps your job as well was difficult, not because of the work you had to do, but because of the people you had to deal with at that job. How many of you ever had that experience? Okay. Well, I got to tell you, people can be hard to work with. I love what I do as a pastor, and I wouldn't want to do anything else with my life other than be a pastor. But I tell you what, there are still days when I just wish I could mow lawns for a living. And not have to talk to people, and not have to deal with the relational challenges that are a part of the ministry. People can be really difficult. Work is painful. And the Bible actually tells us why work is painful for us. So remember how God gave Adam the role of gardener? Well, something went wrong in that garden. And we read about that a little bit later on in the book of Genesis. When we flip to Genesis chapter 3, verse 17, we see that there was a curse released on this world that had implications for our work lives. Genesis 3, verse 17 says this, "And God spoke to Adam and said, because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten of the tree which I have commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you, and pain you shall eat all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground. For out of it you were taken, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return." You see, when creatures are at odds with their Creator, they are also at odds with the rest of His creation. This is exactly what happened to Adam. The earth became hostile to his cultivation. The ground turned against the gardener. Adam's work, which had been joyful and productive, turned into a job that was painful, frustrating, and unfulfilling. And like Adam, we have all disobeyed God's loving commands. And like Adam, we are also suffering in our relationship with work today. And the second big truth I want to give you about work this morning is that our relationship with work is fundamentally broken. Our relationship with work is fundamentally broken. When I think about our role in subduing creation, the image that comes to mind is a man who's riding a horse trying to break a horse. You know, I think of the rider holding on for dear life as this stallion resists his authority to cause it to obey him. There's dust and hooves flying in the air. You know, nature often resists our attempts to subdue it, doesn't it? You know, those of you who have children know this so well. You know, I mean, there's the whole, work of raising kids and shaping them, which is a challenge. But then, you put all this effort into keeping your living room clean, and despite your efforts to put order in your universe, it seems like it constantly is in a state of disorder. Those of you who have young children in particular, who have had young children, I know have had that experience. Well, all of us, no matter what our job is, experience this type of frustration with our work. The concrete that we pour cracks. The ink we write in fades. Our aging bodies keep us from doing the things that once gave us joy in our lives. You know, the investments that we so carefully make evaporate when a disease spreads around the world. I know some of you guys have seen that in your 401ks just recently. You know, it's possible as well that the patient that you've cared for hasn't recovered from the disease that they were facing. The business that you have founded fails despite the best efforts that you could put into it. You get laid off, perhaps, after working 20 years faithfully for the same company. You see, work is difficult and frustrating because our world is broken. And not only is our relationship with work broken, but the way that we think about work is also distorted. And over the next few minutes, I want to give you 3 distortions as we wrap up this morning. 3 distortions of work that we often experience in our lives. The first distortion is this. Work becomes our primary source of significance. Work becomes our primary source of significance. For us as men, work is often central to how we understand ourselves, central to our identities. When we meet someone, the first thing we usually ask is, what do you do for a living? Absolutely. You know, we often find significance in our work, and it can be absolutely devastating when we lose it. Losing a job is one of the significant factors that can cause men to go into depression. And this is understandable. I know many of you who have experienced long-term unemployment, non-desired unemployment. And for us as men, this can be incredibly, incredibly painful. I said earlier that we were made, because we were made in God's image, we were made to work. And I know that many of you have experienced the pain of not being able to do the things that you were created to do. It makes sense that being without work is hard for us because God made us to work. But sometimes I think we forget that we still have value even when we are not employed in a traditional job. You may not have a regular job right now, but I can guarantee you that God still has work for you to do. You know, God still has work for you to do in retirement. God still has work for you to do in unemployment. God has work for you to do in disability. As long as you're still breathing, God has work for you to do. And we should seek out and try to determine what God's work is for us in those different seasons of life. I know some of you may be near to retirement even right now. And I'm guessing that some of you have some anxiety about retirement because so much of your identity is tied up in the work that you're doing right now. I also know that some of you have a hard time leaving work alone during weekends or during vacations because you so depend on work for your significance. You know, we should take pride in the work that we do. We should do that. But we should not draw our ultimate value from our work, because when we do this, we will ultimately end up being empty. It's healthy for us to work, but it's also healthy for us to take a break from work. And this is a lesson that God taught his people in the Bible when he gave them something called a Sabbath. You see, when God told his people how he wanted them to live, he said, you can work for 6 days, but I want you to stop working for 1 day. And this command of God forced God's people to trust him with their needs, even when they weren't working. You know, a really great way for us to see if we really trust God is to see if we can be okay stopping from all of our constant efforts. If you want to see if you are drawing too much of your significance from work, try to take a break from work. Try to take a Sabbath. And God will often use this rest to shine a light on our misplaced identities. Sabbath is an act of trust, and we should seek to trust God in that way with our work. The second distortion that I want to share with you this morning is that we often see our relationship with work as an escape from emotional pain or difficulty at home. As an escape from emotional pain and difficulty at home. You know, sometimes our relationship with work gets disordered, not because of our job necessarily, but because we're trying to avoid something else. We overwork so that we don't have to feel. We overwork so that we don't have to deal with a problem and face a problem. So in times of stress, we spend more time at the office than we need to. You know, when your wife is getting on your case about something, that evening meeting that you could schedule starts to look a little bit more appealing. When your kid is having a difficult challenge with something in life, that project at work just starts to seem a little bit more pressing and a little bit more urgent. You know, stress affects us in different ways. I tend to, when I'm stressed, I tend to obsessively watch YouTube or Netflix. I also, for some reason, find all sorts of things that I want to buy that I think are going to make me feel better. That's some of the ways that I respond to stress. But for many of us, overworking is going to be one of our most basic responses to stress. You know, our boss might be happy with all these extra hours that we're putting in, but if we are putting in our hours at work to escape something else, that is not good for us. It's not good for our relationships. It's not good for our health. Obsessive distraction is not healthy. You know, escaping into our work can even compound our problems because it draws us away from the relationships that we really need to be investing in that moment. This is a dangerous distortion of work. Third and finally, we sometimes see work as a means of self-promotion. We see work as a means of self-promotion. We said earlier that because we're made in God's image, and we work because we're made in God's image, we work and show love towards our neighbor by our labor. But far too often, we work not to show love to our neighbor, but to build ourselves up. We work to increase our power or wealth or influence. We are not doing things for God's glory, as we're commanded in 1 Corinthians 10:31. We're doing things for our own glory. Sometimes we accept that promotion at work not because we really need the money, but because we want the status that that position will give us. You know, our important job can become a way that we convince ourselves that we are really important. It becomes a way to prop up our fragile egos. And when work is about us, it's really, really tempting to make moral compromises if they lead us to greater wealth or power. When work is about us, we fudge the numbers just a little bit so that we look better to our boss. When work is about us, we take credit for things that we didn't actually do. When work is about us, we strong-arm a client into that sale, even though we know that they don't really need what we are selling. When work is about us, we harm others in our pursuit of success. You know, guys, if we want to understand the implications of Jesus' authority over our work lives, we must start by rejecting the lie that our work is primarily about us, because it's not. We shouldn't be trying to build our own reputation. We are servants of God who've been entrusted with the skills and resources that we have by a higher authority. We've been entrusted with those resources by our Creator. And, you know, the capital that we're investing is His capital. The strengths that we have and the skills that we have come from Him ultimately. Even our drive and ambition flows from our Creator. Because it's that creative force that caused Him to create the world. We are investing His capital. We're not investing our own. You know, there's only one kingdom that will endure for all of eternity, and that's Jesus' kingdom. So instead of trying to build our own kingdom, we need to be on the ground floor of His kingdom, helping Him, laying on His foundation. We can only have a right relationship with our work when we submit to Jesus' authority in this area of our lives. Our work is about Him. It's not about us. You know, as I shared these three areas, distortions that we have in our relationship with work, I imagine that you probably had one or two of these that you said, yep, that's me. That's definitely me. Well, I can relate to every single one of them. I can relate to all three. You know, Dave and I are pastors, but let me tell you, it's just as easy for us to have a distorted relationship with work as it is anyone else. Preaching can very easily be a form of self-promotion. It's very easy to escape to work when I'm dealing with emotional difficulties in other parts of my life, especially when you're serving in ministry and you're getting positive feedback. Oh, thank you, Pastor, for sharing that. I really appreciate it. If you're getting that positive feedback in this area of your life and you're getting discouraging feedback in another, it's so easy to run to work. And we as well, those of us who are in the ministry, need to remember that we are children of God before we're pastors. Our relationship with God is with Him, and that's where we draw our value, not from the work that we do before other people. Doing ministry does not keep us from the effects of sin in our work, and none of us ever are escaping from the effects of sin in our work in this world. You may spend your days watching kids, trading bonds, or butchering chickens. Whatever it may be, no matter what we do, we must fight these three distortions of our work. We need to remember that our primary identity is in Jesus. But the way that we think about work in this world right now is broken. But that's not the end of the story. In this world, we will experience futility and lack of purpose in our work. The author of Ecclesiastes, the preacher, teaches us this so clearly. Everything is vanity. Everything I've done with my life isn't worth anything. We'll experience that just like he did. But if Jesus is in charge of our lives, the results of our work is up to him. We can turn that over to him. We should work with diligence and serve with excellence and trust him with the results. Submitting to Jesus' authority over our work lives can change the way that we experience work today. Because you know that he is the one who's in charge of the results. You are not. And this will not be the case forever, however. God is in the process of restoring our right relationship with work. The corruption that we have in our world and in our minds will one day be completely removed. Our relationship with work will finally be made right. You know, I'm convinced that in the church, we have a really shoddy understanding of heaven and what eternity is going to be like for those who know Jesus. You know, in the new creation, we will not be lounging on clouds all day. We will be doing fruitful, productive work like Adam did before sin corrupted this world. Our relationship with work will finally be made right. We seek to subdue creation, knowing with confidence that one day Jesus will renew all of creation. Because Jesus, now and forever, will be the Lord of our work. Every square inch of it. Will you please pray with me? God, we come to you this morning and admit that our relationship with our work is disordered. And God, we ask that you would reorder our relationship with work. God, we know that you will do that eternally, but we ask that you would reorder our relationship with work even now as we serve in our jobs or our callings, whatever they may be. God, I pray that as we go into our groups now, that you would help us to think more deeply about your authority over work, and that we would submit to that authority more completely. We ask these things in your name, Jesus. Amen.
Amen.